think today is the day? Are you feeling confident going into today's hearing?
Everybody, I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome to our special coverage of the Sean Diddy Combs case. The man facing federal racketeering, sex trafficking, prostitution charges. He's going to be back in court today because he and his defense counsel will be arguing for bail once again. Now, to be clear, this was already denied multiple times by other judges, okay? But this is the first time the current judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian, will be hearing this issue, deciding this issue. And we're going to be hearing competing testimonies, competing narratives, I should say, about whether or not Sean Combs should be released before trial. So Combs, one argument will be allegedly reaching out to witnesses and victims, including behind bars, that he put forward an attractive, expansive bail package, $50 million, home confinement, 24/7 monitoring by private security. Prosecutors will say that doesn't really alleviate the dangers. Speaking of which, you'll probably hear prosecutors say that he is a danger because of past episodes of alleged violent activity, and you know they're going to be highlighting the 2016 video of him purportedly beating his ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura at a hotel hallway. That will most likely come up. I will say one particular area that will definitely come up is how this case is distinguished from the Mike Jeffries case. This is the former Abercrombie & Fitch CEO who was recently arrested and charged with sex trafficking in New York, but he was released on a $10 million bond. Judge Subramanian said to the prosecutors earlier this week, be prepared to explain the differences between that case and Combs' case. So what we're going to be doing, and you see this live shot of the courthouse right now. Of course, there are no cameras in that courtroom, unfortunately, but we are going to be providing you live updates about what is happening in that courtroom. Long Crimes' Elizabeth Milner is in that courtroom. She's going to be coming out later to do a live shot for us as well about what she saw and what she heard. And we are also going to be taking your questions about the case, about the hearing, so make sure to submit them up on YouTube. Now, before I get into this, before I bring on my guests, I do want a little announcement for you. Little thing, some would say self-promotion. It's fine. I feel fine about it. I have a very special announcement. So if you're interested in a deep dive in the Diddy case, you have to subscribe to Wondery Plus, because why? Law and Crime will be launching a brand new podcast series. It is called The Rise and Fall of Diddy. It is launching on December 4th, and you know who it's hosted by? It's hosted by me. So yes, it's a little self-promotion, but again, if you want a full, in-depth, 360 understanding of the story, make sure to check it out. All right, I want to talk about this. A lot of different moving parts to what we can expect today. So I am joined right now by Law and Crime's attorney, their general counsel, Elizabeth Vulai. Not here to make sure that we're not in trouble. We never get in trouble, right? No, but she's been following the case. We love having her on. And we are also joined by criminal defense attorney Nima Rahmani. Thank you so much. She's a former federal prosecutor as well. So happy to have you both here. Nima, I will start with you. The big issue, I think it's going to come up, is prosecutors. Why shouldn't Combs be released if Mike Jeffries is released? And they responded in a filing. We'll get to it, but what do you think?
Well, two very different cases, Jesse. And obviously, when we're talking about sex trafficking, you're talking about force, fraud, or coercion. And in Combs' case, we're talking about a lot of force. Now, Jeffries, there was an alleged fraud. The victims were told one thing, they'd be models, and next thing you know, they're participating in these sex acts. There was some allegations of force. Maybe some security didn't let them leave, but there's no video of Jeffries beating anyone. And the sheer number of victims that we have, I know obviously there's only one in this indictment so far, but many have filed civil lawsuits. So in my opinion, two very different cases. And you know what? People lie, defense attorneys lie, defendants lie all the time, but video doesn't lie. And I think if Subramanian looks at that video that CNN got in May from that 2016 beating, less than a mile from where I'm sitting right now, that is not someone that is going to be safe if released. He's a danger to the community.
defense would say that's 8.5 years ago. Should that be definitive proof that he's a danger to others on the outside? I want to give everybody an update, and then Elizabeth, I'm going to go to you. As I said, we'll provide you updates from court. Sean Combs' attorney, Tony Rico, has come back into the gallery to speak with Sean Diddy Combs' supporters. So apparently there might be supporters in that courtroom. We'll get a better understanding when Elizabeth Milner comes out to us later. And Alexandra Shapiro, who is another one of Combs' defense attorneys, is sitting reading from a binder in that courtroom. 4 prosecutors are in the front row. Sean Combs has been brought in. He is wearing the MDC jail tan uniform that we've described before. You probably see it in kind of these courtroom sketches. And he has hugged his lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, and then sits chatting with his other attorney, Mr. Rico. Okay, so Elizabeth, let me go to you about this. The government has said with Mike Jeffries, he wasn't charged with racketeering. He's 80 years old. Sean Combs is 55 years old. There are efforts by Sean Combs to try to obstruct this investigation, reaching out to witnesses and victims, including behind bars. And there's not, but again, on the other hand, Mike Jeffries is charged with sex trafficking using force, fraud, or coercion, very similar to Sean Combs, but they say that this is superficial similarities and it's 2 completely different cases. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so as well. Obviously, there's a little bit of overlap there. They've both been indicted for sex trafficking charges in federal court in New York. They're both high public profile figures. So there's some overlap, but I think also one of the biggest key differences is that so far with the Jeffries case, we haven't seen any allegations of possible witness tampering, any obstruction of justice. I think that's going to be a big part of what the prosecution is going to try to argue. And it was also layered into the hearing that happened earlier this week with all of the notes that were seized as well.
Nima, we're getting some questions from our viewers, so I want to read them. Again, submit them on YouTube. The question that we first have is from Sandy Rivera, who, by the way, Sandy, thank you so much. I know that you always comment on YouTube. We really appreciate it. The question for Nima is, why did he request no restraints at this hearing? Just to put a little clarification on that, he had actually petitioned to not be in restraints, not only for this hearing, but the last hearing, and presumably for the hearings moving forward. It's interesting considering there's no jury yet, so why request no restraints?
Well, it's a typical request that defense attorneys raise, and certainly you don't want him to be restrained if you're his lawyers before the jury. That can be prejudicial. But right now, to the extent that he has been nonviolent in prison, nonviolent in court, that's something that the U.S. Marshals can certainly handle Sean Diddy Combs without restraints.
Question for you, Elizabeth. This is from Fishlock47 on YouTube. Are any celebrities expected to testify? Well, I don't think today. The question becomes, will they be testify at an upcoming trial, which is currently scheduled for May of 2025?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see any celebrities today. I think today is going to be strictly about, his bail hearing. What are the reasons that advocate that he be kept in prison until the trial, whatnot. But I would be shocked if there's no celebrities coming forward ultimately at his trial. Again, we've talked about this is someone who's had relationships with celebrities, friendships, business relationships for decades. He's been in the business forever. There's going to be people who have relevant information here.
Nima, question for you. This is my question. So in anticipation of this hearing, Sean Combs, I'm going to turn it this way. Sean Combs' defense counsel filed something very interesting with the court. They filed this is what they write the court. They write Judge Subramanian. In support of Mr. Combs' renewed bail application, we have submitted to the court and the government a 20-minute video under seal. And we don't know what that video is, but they said the video was prepared by Connor McCourt, who was previously a foot patrol officer with the New York City Police Department. He was promoted to sergeant. He was assigned to the Technical Assistant Response Unit. Why do I feel this has to be about Cassandra Ventura? I say that because it seems that a big factor, a big point of discussion in this bail analysis, and there's been briefs back and forth, has been whether or not she is credible, whether or not her description of this relationship was, for example, the 2016 video of her trying to escape a freak-off wasn't an example of sex trafficking, or as the defense would say, we'll show you text messages, we'll show you other evidence that this is just a really toxic relationship. It's not evidence of sex trafficking or racketeering. It can't be used to justify detention. Would I be so far off to say that this 20-minute video under seal might have to do with her?
I think that's a good guess, Jesse, and we can guess that because the defense has said that this video is edited. It doesn't show the full story. It's a snapshot in time. I don't know what more we need to see, even if the relationship was toxic, tumultuous. Let's not forget, it was Cassie Ventura's bombshell lawsuit in November that really started all this. And the other victims who have come forward have told very similar stories of physical and sexual violence. So even if Cassie, Diddy's longtime girlfriend of more than a decade, is lying, even if you don't believe her, I mean, there are dozens of other victims who are telling the same story. It's going to be hard to disbelieve everyone.
Want to give everybody an update in court. Sean Combs and his lawyers, they're sitting at the middle of three tables. There are two U.S. Marshals who are there as well, and they're, rather than directly behind him, as is usually the case, they are on his sides. Nima, I'll just go back to you. Is there some sort of security risk that we should be thinking about here?
I don't think so. I mean, Diddy could have taken off, and we're talking about bail. You're really looking at two issues: risk of flight and danger to the community. I don't think he's going to try anything, because that's a surefire way to be shackled the rest of the trial, and he's not that stupid.
Okay, well, in all fairness, let me just say he's also accused of reaching out to witnesses and victims through his family, when that became a central issue of why he's been denied bail. If that's true, if the prosecutors can prove that to the court, that's not great. That would not be the most reasonable thing. We'll get to that in a second. We have a question from YouTube here. I actually think he probably has the better shot making bail in front of this judge right now, because the judge seems at least open to some of the arguments put forward by the defense. We'll see if it works. Which brings me to this question that we have from YouTube. This is from Dr. Firewater on YouTube. Seems like a contradiction, Firewater, but anyway.
Interesting name.
Will Diddy's life be put in jeopardy if he's released on bail? Public outrage or celebrity hit job? Is it safer to keep him incarcerated until cleared?
I think that's highly doubtful. I mean, in the case of Mike Jeffries, he was able to be released on bail. He's under home confinement. He's being monitored. You know, someone like Diddy, who has not just homes, but really estates with security. If he's confined to his home, I would imagine that's probably safer than most prisons within New York.
More people are talking about Diddy than they are Mike Jeffries. And more people, the argument would be, are concerned about being wrapped up in Sean Diddy Combs' allegations or anything like that.
It is true. It is true. I think with high-profile defendants in prison, though, there's always a risk that they could be possibly more targeted, or sort of more attention, negative or positive, is paid on them while they're in jail. Versus, you know, if he's sentenced to home confinement, he has a lot of resources and a lot of wealth still at his readily available hands.
Yep. All right. We had a question from Sean D. Cole on YouTube. Nemo, I'll throw this to you. What would be your best possible defense strategy?
Thank God I'm not doing defense work anymore, but I think the best defense strategy would be to argue that the sexual activity happened, but it was consensual. That gets rid of the force, fraud, or coercion. The challenge is, if they do supersede and they add sex trafficking of minors, that argument goes out the window, because minors can't consent. Now, Diddy is allegedly contacting witnesses, and there's probably a few ways that he can persuade them to either do a 180 or not show up at trial and testify. He can outright bribe them, pay them off through civil settlements and judgments. He can blackmail them. He can try to threaten them. But, I mean, his best defense is for these witnesses to go sideways. That's really the only defense in this case.
All right. We have an update from court. Sean Combs' lawyer, Mr. Rico, says the family of Mr. Sean Love Combs are here. They traveled a long way. Judge Subramanian says, thank you for being here. Mr. Agnifilo, tell me about the legal pads. And Mark Agnifilo responds, the first time I saw them was Tuesday. Elizabeth, this feels like in response to the issue that happened earlier this week about whether the government improperly photographed potentially privileged materials of Sean Combs. I didn't think that issue was going to be decided today, or at least discussed today. I thought they were going to be briefing it, and maybe the judge would have to decide if there was a privilege issue later on. Actually, before I throw it to you, another update. As we sit, this is from Mark Agnifilo. As we sit here today, I'm not sure when legal was written on each of them. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. Different members of the defense team were telling him to write legal on the pads. There's a photo of a pad without legal on it. Again, this is all in relation to whether there was a big sweep at the Metropolitan Detention Center, and photographs were taken of Sean Combs' notebooks. And the question was were 19 pages or other materials improperly photographed of his conversations with his attorneys about legal strategy, what was written on the pads. What do you take away from this?
That's right. So I'm not surprised that the judge is discussing it a little bit. The judge had said earlier this week that he will hold separate hearings regarding whether these notes could be actually ultimately used at trial in May, and that's sort of later on down the line. But he did say in a filing earlier this week, be prepared to talk about what happened with that legal sort of note that was on the papers and where did it go. I'm not surprised that he wants to talk about that, because I think a big part of what the prosecution is going to try to argue to prevent him from being released on bail is potential witness tampering. And what they said earlier this week is that there was some evidence within the notes of him, trying to contact witnesses through third parties, trying to get family members to post, positive things about him on social media. So I think there's a little bit of an overlap there.
And there is certain material that was photographed that will not now be used as evidence in this bail argument. The judge said, throw it out, throw out these copies. You're not going to be able to argue that prosecution to support your case. But Elizabeth does raise an interesting point here, Nima. The idea, and I think this will come up, was Sean Combs developing this social media campaign through his family really is centered around his birthday, to post positive messages about his birthday. There was this video of his family wishing him happy birthday. You can hear him on the other line from the MDC. He seemed to be happy. And the idea was he purposely orchestrated this social media campaign to influence a potential jury. And the idea would be, if he's orchestrating this behind bars, you can't let him out on pretrial release. What else would he do? Now, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Some would say, and the prosecution says we have evidence to prove that was his intent, was to influence a potential jury. Do you think that's strong, though? I mean, we're not even close to a trial. Do you think, and over his social media, also he's a public figure. Doesn't he have a right to change the public narrative about what everybody's been saying about him?
Jesse, I'm as pro-prosecution as they come, and I believe that they have evidence that he's contacting witnesses, and that is witness tampering and obstruction. But to argue against a social media public relations campaign is really a bridge too far, in my opinion. If you're the prosecution, you got to kind of maintain your credibility. Obviously, there's the courtroom and there's the court of public opinion. There's no gag order or other order preventing him from doing this. So don't make arguments that not necessarily aren't nonsensical, that aren't really advancing your case. Focus on the witnesses and what matters, and you don't have to worry about Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and whatever.
Just said, I suggest both parties put in letters by Monday at noon about what type of communications Mr. Combs may engage in. Monday at noon. So that's interesting to think about. What does it mean? He's going to be out or he's not going to be out? But his lawyer, Combs' lawyer, Tony Rico, said, we have to email for a week to get him a file folder. Then he said his adult children are willing to obey. He's not a lawless person. We spent hours at the MDC. Mr. Combs was writing down what I said. He's not out of control. DOJ is responsible for the MDC. Those phone calls from me all the time, and I hang up.